Hello and welcome to the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Neil Geddes-Ward, and Andy Chaplin. Andy, how are you? You've been having problems with your car, I hear.
Yes, there was a slight issue. I knew there were things that needed doing. I knew the caliper needed doing, which is to do with the brakes on the wheels. That's at the back of the car. What I didn't realise was there was two front wheels that needed doing as well. Interestingly, my Honda was burning through fuel like a 60s rock star goes through bottles of vodka. Apparently what was going on with the two front wheels, the calipers were slightly on, and my garage basically said it was almost like driving around the brakes partially on. So there was friction going on, and kind of that was absolutely munching through the fuel. That's now been sorted, and I've had the oil changed and oil filter changed. So now it's actually pretty efficient. So I went to Colchester at the weekend, funnily enough, to see David Icke, which was a brilliant show, and the fuel efficiency was a lot better. And the drive shaft snapped as well, so that was another 300 quid gone. But cross fingers, I think now it's pretty much okay. It's running okay. I went to Colchester, as I say, and no problems. A lot more fuel efficient, so I'm quite happy. David Icke was amazing. Really interesting talk, and he goes on and on. And do you know what? I don't think I've seen him sip a single bottle of water or glass of water throughout the entire show, and it was something like 3 hours, and then he had a 10-minute break. So not a normal theatre 20-minute or 30-minute break. It was a 10-minute break, and then he did like another 2 or 3 hours. Unbelievable how he keeps going, and he must be in his 70s, surely. He must be, or at least coming up to 70.
I think he drinks the same stuff that you put in your car.
Yeah, quite possibly. He's got plenty of miles on the gallon and plenty to go.
Wow.
He was talking about how the whole transgender movement ties in with things, and where political correctness is getting us, which is basically towards fascism. It's kind of like it goes in a really weird direction, because what he was talking about is actually kind of getting rid of how society normally thinks of a normal human, whether they're male or female, almost so that they kind of end up like these hybridized synthetic robot drones, which is kind of what the system wants. Very kind of like conspiratorial stuff, but I can see exactly where it's going, and I think he's right in a way.
Did he mention something about till receipts, and that turns you into a transgender person or something? This is what someone that I mean, that's recently about it. That
would be kind of like a tabloid newspaper summation of what he was saying, but there is some truth in it. Essentially, it's to do with a chemical called bisphenol A. Bisphenol A is an estrogen mimicker, so it does the same thing as estrogen hormones does, and it's also within anything plastic bottles, Tupperware, any kind of like plastic packaging has this bisphenol A. What that does when you touch it or ingest it, it goes into your system, and it acts as if you're on hormone replacement drugs. It acts as if you're taking estrogen. Estrogen is what females hormones are to do with. So the more estrogen you have, the more female or female tendencies you have and develop, and the more testosterone you have, the more male tendencies you have. So somebody who is female that wants to become a male, apart from kind of having surgery, they would be on testosterone tablets to make them more male-like, and the reverse is true for men. If men want to become women as such, they would have the SNP, and they would have basically estrogen tablets, and bisphenol A is kind of like an estrogen mimicker. So in a way, it's kind of like making men more effeminate. And you'll also notice that the sperm count is dropping. You'll notice that fertility is dropping, and you'll notice that 20% testosterone is dropping in males, and that's a scientific study. That's not just tinfoil hat stuff. So this has got some kind of scientific backing. It's quite worrying.
It's interesting that kind of ties in, you could argue, the fact that the UK is minting now plastic notes instead of paper pound notes, £10 notes, £20 notes, things like that, and £5 notes. We've now got these very plasticky bag looking notes now, haven't we?
Yeah, I mean, I've got no problem with that. I think they'll probably last longer. And in fact, the Australians have been doing plastic notes for ages. And you'll love the reason for this, by the way. The Australians introduced plastic notes so their surfers didn't get their money wet.
What?
That is the most Aussie reason. It's like, yeah, mate, we've got a bit of a problem with paper money here. What are we going to do about that? No, just make a plastic, mate. No problem.
Wow, that's yeah. I suppose you could argue the same for the UK because it's always raining. So yeah, absolutely.
But the till receipts, apparently what it is, till receipts have a slightly different way of printing. So it's from what I can gather, it's not really ink that's kind of like being ink jetted onto paper. It's kind of like more of a burning process. So if you were, and be careful if you do this, folks, if you get some till receipts and you put a lighter underneath it, but far enough away that it doesn't just catch a light, you'll notice that the entire receipt will go black. And the reason for that apparently is the bisphenol A chemical structure with it, and what the printers are doing in stores, so that they don't run out of ink and have to keep replacing ink. They're using heat to actually kind of imprint.
It's like pyrographing,
lettering.
Wood. You know, when you get those decorative lettering, people burn them in with solder and things. It's the sort of same thing, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. It's so, it makes sense. It makes sense because obviously tills ringing all day long, they're going to run out of ink, and the last thing you want is to go and faff around with ink. However, the downside is it does have bisphenol A, and you handle that, and it goes into your hands, and if you eat food or whatever, or just impregnates with your skin, essentially you're getting estrogen mimickers entering your body.
My goodness. Wow. Well, I better not take any more till receipts then from the thing. I might.
Or use latex glove, but if you've got a latex allergy, that would be a problem as well. So you can't win really. I mean, the thing is, there's everything is toxic. The air is toxic. The sea is toxic. I read recently, because I thought I'd be healthy and kind of go more fish based, but then I was reading salmon that is farmed is one of the most toxic foods you can buy. Tuna's got mercury in it. Meat has got steroids and antibiotics in it. The reason you get wax on your fruit and vegetables is that's actually pesticides and sprays that they put it on. Fruit and veg should be shiny, but the waxy substance is actually the pesticides. That's got hugely carcinogenic and cancerous substances in it. You'll love this one, Neil. I mean, this is real tinfoil hat stuff, but there's something called Codex Alimentarius. It sounds like a computer code, but it's actually legislation that I think is now brought in, basically kind of destroying nutrients or taking away nutrients from the food chain, and introducing some of the worst banned pesticides that have been banned in the past, and reintroducing those to look after crops, etc. Basically, because pesticides are what's happening. There's a battle between insects and pesticides. So the insects eventually get an immunity. It's almost like with hospitals with antibiotics and viruses. Eventually, the viruses get an immunity, and so what they have to do, they have to kind of like up the strength of the pesticides and up the strength of the antibiotics. And what that's mean with Codex Alimentarius is they're bringing in previously banned, because they're so toxic and so dangerous, chemicals, bringing those back in as pesticides to use. It's horrendous.
Well, I'll be taking my fruit and veg back to the shop, and I'll have proof that I've purchased it with my burnt till receipt.
I would say to people, if you can do it, grow organic. Listen to your grandparents and your great-grandparents. If any of them were alive during the war, and if any of them grew their own organic vegetables, that's the way to go. The same with meats. I mean, it's a bit grim, really, because in the Second World War, they asked people to breed rabbits so they could have rabbits, but they got so attached to them as pets, they couldn't face killing them. But again, the way to go with meat might be to, raise your own not crop. What's the word? What am I thinking? Herd.
Livestock.
Livestock. That's the word I'm looking for.
That's the one. Well, you need really good weather for it, and I mean, here in the UK, it's always raining. Not always, but a lot of the time we had a great summer. But I know a place that's really good for that sort of thing. That's California, sunny California. Now, it's no coincidence that tonight's guest on the Paranormal Peep Show is actually going to be speaking from California. So can we welcome to tonight's episode, Cyrus Kirkpatrick.
Hello, Cyrus.
Cyrus, hiya. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing okay.
Good. Welcome to the Paranormal Peep Show. Thank you for joining us. And you are actually, I believe, our first guest on the Paranormal Peep Show, who is linking up to us via the USA, because we mostly, I think, spoke to UK authors and researchers for our first kind of year. But I think we're branching out a little bit just to find out what people on the other side of the pond are doing in their paranormal research. I've been listening to some of our other shows, and they're all very interesting. We've got some very interesting folk over there in the United States telling us about their UFOs and all that sort of stuff that have been going on there. So you're an author, aren't you? And you're into a lot of obviously interesting subjects. But the thing I picked up about you was that you're very much interested in something that me and Andy are both very much interested in. That's life after death and communication with the afterlife, aren't you?
Yes, that's correct. My first book is Understanding Life After Death, and so that title, I guess, kind of sums up what we're talking about.
And go on, Andy?
I was just going to say, Cyrus, on a slightly different note, have you managed to escape all the wildfires out in California?
I did. I mean, it was basically relatively close to where I am. So I'm living around Culver City, Los Angeles, and so basically the town of Malibu went up in flames. Yeah. So a lot of celebrity homes were destroyed. Many people died as well. And,
oh God!
You could see all the smoke. I mean, it was quite apocalyptic. So
yeah, I saw it. It was just unbelievable. And obviously, our thoughts and hearts go out to all the people affected. Not a good situation at all.
Mm.
Yes, indeed. It's been quite a ride. I mean, imagine like the freeways being closed down and like nobody getting out of anywhere because the whole towns are being evacuated. So it was like that for a couple of days. And so you just, had to just lay low, stay inside.
Yeah, sorry, Neil, I cut you off.
Okay, it's okay. Are all the fires completely quenched now? Is everything sorted, or is it still going on?
Potentially, we had a bit of rain the last week, so I think that probably cleaned up any last remnants of the fires. But at this point, living in California, I'd be surprised if there wasn't a fire going on. So I'm not even positive if it all is finished yet. I mean, it's like there's always a fire going, and it's just something that we're all living with.
Yeah, I guess it depends on are they going to still report on a fire that's newsworthy? So yeah, like you say, there could be still things kicking about here and there. But yeah, very sad occurrence to the people of California and Los Angeles in general. And let's just hope the whole thing gets a swift resolution and everything gets back to normal as soon as possible, really.
Well, if you ask David Icke, maybe it's the energy weapons or something like that.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah,
I've seen some of the photo. It is bizarre. I mean, is it that? I don't know, but I've seen kind of like images from kind of like an aerial vantage point where literally there's kind of like individual houses that are burnt to the ground, surrounded by trees and foliage that are not touched, and then other houses around it.
Yeah,
in an island. An island.
I've
so
noticed that.
You'd have a block that's on fire, and then all of the houses around it. You could understand if it's like a wave of fire going through, but it's just the most bizarre thing.
No trees are touched, and just the houses are down. It's really bizarre.
I don't understand that. And somebody argued, I heard the argument, that trees have a natural fire block. That it's something to do with like the way they drop their leaves, or they produce oil or something to be fire retardant. Yeah, okay. Well, what about the phrase forest fire? Forests do catch fire. So that doesn't really hold water.
Have you ever thrown a Christmas tree onto a fire? They go.
Well, this is
seconds.
This is it. Yeah. I've heard the argument of trees, and I've really forgotten what it was. Trees have some kind of natural fire barrier resistance, but I think that's just rubbish. And the photos are just odd. They're very, very odd.
Subject of another talk, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So are you into the kind of the conspiracy side of things, or is it the afterlife side of things?
I mean, I would say more or less I'm not. I mean, I am. Hopefully, we'll discover this on this show. I tend to be pretty like objective minded, scientific minded, like to approach things from kind of an irrational perspective. And I'm not thought to say all conspiracy theories are irrational, but sometimes the community gets a little bit out of hand. As an example, like I like what David Icke has to say sometimes, but I think he suffered a branding issue when he began to go off about like the Queen as a shape-shifting reptilian alien. And so sometimes things get just a bit out of hand. And so that's why it has to be a subject that I have to keep a little bit at arm's length. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think the rational thing is actually good. So I would like to know a rational explanation as to why, or as to how those pictures exist. How, you know, a small block of houses, like 5 or 6 houses, are burnt to the ground, surrounded by absolutely nothing.
Well, I mean, I could probably offer one real quick. I remember when they kind of debunked spontaneous human combustion by, I think they were burning like a pig's carcass.
Yeah.
And they came to find that at the end, it's like the carcass became entirely self-contained inside of like in somebody's flat, and so it looked like it just blew up, even though it had been burning for like, you know, many hours. And so there are some strange properties about fire that may lead to a phenomenon like that. But hey, maybe it's a directed energy weapon. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the jury's out on that one. I mean, God knows. But
they had a great barbecue at the end of their experiment, at least.
Yes.
So going back onto subject, Cyrus, we've got to ask this: if you're delving into the afterlife, first of all, how did you get into it, and have you seen what some might describe as a ghost or apparition in your life?
Well, you know, I think that this whole subject, at a certain point, has to transcend a little bit beyond the topic of like ghosts and apparitions, because really, like, those types of things is our interpretation of a much more complex thing that's happening. So in my life, have I seen a ghost or apparition? Maybe on an uneducated level, I would interpret my experiences to be ghosts or apparitions. But as an example, I practice out-of-body experiences. And so when you get good at out-of-body experiences, you can become the ghost or the apparition. And so I've been in that state before, where I've been able to, as an example, spy on people, spy on my roommate, you know, wander around the house as a quote ghost. But then in that state, I've also encountered people also on that side who we would interpret them as being ghosts or apparitions, but they're just people hanging out in that kind of in-between realm. I call like the near Earth astral plane, where you can interact with this world, but you're outside of your body.
Do you think there were other astral projectors, or do you think there were people who had literally left their body and were kind of, you know, in the traditional sense, ghosts? Or put it this way, could you differentiate between someone doing exactly the same thing as you, still alive and still in this earth, but astrally projecting? And could you differentiate them between the actual dead, so to speak?
In a sense, because there was actually maybe 3 different types of people you can encounter. So maybe even 4. So one is somebody who is dreaming. So oftentimes when we're dreaming, we're out of our bodies, but we don't even realize it. And so as an example, if I were to go into my roommate's bedroom, which it's a bit impolite, I know, but I was doing it in the name of science. So I'd go into his bedroom and I would see him dreaming. So he would be laying on his bed, and then he would also be standing about maybe 5 feet away from his bed. And he'd be kind of mumbling to himself. His eyes would be closed. So these would be 2 separate versions of him. So there would be one on the bed sleeping, and then there would be him standing outside the bed, kind of like he was like a sleepwalking or in a dream state. But I wouldn't be able to interact with either form of him, and that's because he was asleep, but like he was disconnected from his body. On the same note, you can meet people who could be asleep and conscious, and then they're having an out-of-body experience, and then you'd be able to interact with them. And that's kind of the gold mine, because then you'd be able to talk to them and meet up afterwards and then confirm the experience. Then you meet entities that just hang around the astral plane, the near Earth astral plane. This is what we think of when we think of like hauntings, and entities that just want to like be voyeuristic. They want to stay in that in-between state. And then there's also kind of visitors who they're not haunting that in-between realm, but for whatever reason they're poking around. They come from obviously much better places. And so I was actually there in London a couple of years back, having an out-of-body experience at a hostel that was upstairs from an old pub. And I went out of my body and I found this old Englishman, you know, poking around the hostel, kind of like being a bit of a voyeur and checking out the girls, I think, who were sleeping in the dorm rooms. And I actually gave him a good talking to, and then I came back to my body. So that gives you an example of, you know, that's that could technically be what we'd call a phantasm or a ghost, but it wouldn't look like it when you're observing it from the vantage point of being out of your body. It will look like just a normal person.
So Cyrus, getting back to your origins of the whole thing of life after death research, what kind of prompted you to head in that direction, to research what a lot of people would rather avoid, if you like?
I think it's my personality type, so I tend not to like problems going unchecked. So if there's an issue, I like to solve the problem. And I think a lot of people are this way. But when I was a kid, I began to think of death as an issue that possibly it could be solved by just doing a bit of vigilant research on the topic. And I think probably about the time I was a teenager, I began a heavy amount of interest in the topic of an afterlife. I think the first book I discovered about the topic in detail was a free book on the internet. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the guy, but it's VictorZamit.com. That's Z as in Z, A-M-M-I-T. And it's a lawyer presents the case for the afterlife.
I'm familiar with his website, yeah. But
I've definitely heard the name.
And he's actually had his site on since before I was on the internet, probably since I was a little kid. I think since like the mid or late 90s, he's been active. So I discovered that website, and it really got me going into a lot of these subjects because I began to look at it as a bit of an undiscovered frontier that at the same time would kind of solve the issue that we have of having this paralyzing fear of what happens after we die. And I began to think, if I can get a handle on this, I think my life is going to be a lot happier than all the adults that I've known. And at this point, maybe I'm 14, 15 years old. I guess I would still call them adults, but older people who seem miserable because they've been hit by grief and they're scared of dying and all these things. And I'm just like, maybe I can look into this and find a way to avoid having to deal with all that stress. And I kind of feel like that was the process that got me into all of this. But at the same time, there may even be a bit of a spiritual side to it as well. I was a bit hardwired, I suppose, to want to investigate the topic because maybe I want to make a difference in this area. If you want to go into all the soul contracty kind of stuff like that. But in a nutshell, I guess that's my answer.
So in the book, you mention that you've got a bit of a skeptical nature, and you was quite skeptical about the whole thing initially. Was that right?
I was skeptical of various elements of it. I had to kind of unravel my skepticism in time, and I still become a bit skeptical of certain elements. But, by the time I was having my own experiences, I was able to at least verify to myself the authenticity of many different subjects. But certainly, if we kind of look at the progression of how I evolved in this area, I probably began, again, maybe 15, 16 years old on the internet, mostly taking the skeptical side of most arguments, which would even include kind of siding with the hard-nosed kind of materialist skeptic types of people on the internet. And so usually I was like taking that position. But of course, slowly I began to join the other side of the, I guess, no pun intended, the other side of the argument. And, so that evolved a bit gradually. But even when I was kind of having the title of skeptic, it's one of those things where sometimes you're exploring different points of view. So even when you're arguing with like these closed-minded skeptics on the internet, sometimes they're not really as like you may think they are. They may just be exploring that point of view and kind of role-playing a little bit. And I kind of saw myself doing that to an extent.
So what point, you said you started to develop your own experiences of, like, for instance, experimenting out-of-body experiences. And obviously, from reading your book, you've done some research into Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe and the Monroe Institute. Legendary book, I must admit. It was a great book, and it actually gives you instructions on how to leave your body. I mean, was it that book that you followed to actually, learn to astrally project, or was it a whole range of techniques you tried?
That was the first book I read, and I read it still in that same period of like adolescence or being in my middle teen years, I suppose. But at that point, I was too scared to fully have an out-of-body experience. My brother had been dabbling quite a bit in that area, so he's the one who had the book. And so I'd sneak into his room, and then I'd look at his book, rather that book in particular, and I would study the topic as well. But, I had a couple of times nearly had an out-of-body experience, but I was too frightened of the whole process. Also because my brother had been having a few kind of negative experiences doing all of that. And so that helped prevent me from exploring it too deeply. It wasn't until maybe only a few years ago, about 2014, that I began having full-fledged out-of-body / astral projection experiences. And I'm not even so positive, what factors led it to begin happening when it did. It's like it just suddenly came on one day. And it had been on my mind. There had been a couple of books I had read about it, so maybe that helped to trigger it. There was an indie book by this guy named Kensho. He has a book called Out of Body Experiences by Kensho. And he's this fellow I met in Los Angeles. We ended up becoming pretty good friends. And, so he laid out a lot of practical methods to have out-of-body experiences. And it's possible talking to him helped to initiate them, or I don't really know. But, it's almost like at a certain point when the time is right, maybe when you no longer feel such a sense of hesitation or fear about having those experiences, then your mind will finally give you permission to have the full experience. And so that's what began happening to me. So I began having the full experience, I suppose.
So what were the negative experiences that your brother had?
Well, we hear about this kind of stuff a lot in out-of-body literature. So you have shadow people. He was having a particular bad issue with essentially the gray extraterrestrial, which would sometimes come into his bedroom and harass him, or I think attempt to abduct him. That's a very different topic, because it kind of shows you that you can be abducted in your astral body, and you wouldn't even realize it, because typically it can be the same kind of sensory experience as being in the body you're in now. So that's some food for thought when we hear about alien abduction types of topics. It could very well be that these things are happening on a different plane, a different dimension. So he was having quite frightening experiences with gray aliens. And there was a particular story that reinforced all of that, because his wife had come out to the ranch to caretake when me and our parents were out in New Mexico. And, she always heard about these kind of gray aliens coming into his room. So he was out feeding the horses one morning, and she was laying in bed. And then, she was kind of half asleep, and she opens her eyes, and then one of the gray aliens is staring back at her, and then she flips out and runs across the hall screaming. And then my brother decides never to come back to the old family home again after that. So especially after that incident happened, I was straight up like, I don't want anything to do with this. And that probably kept me from having any experiences for a long time.
Well, funnily enough, this does lead us into David Icke. So as well as the grey aliens, and I'm asking this to yourself and on behalf of your brother as well, did you come across anything that might be termed demonic or jinn or reptile or even Nordic based at all?
I would say demonic, yes. As far as the reptilians are concerned, if we want to go down that crazy road, I've heard theories proposed that some of the shadow people that we encounter in the out-of-body state could be literally reptilians astral projecting to siphon the energy from people. That was one theory I heard, but I don't add a lot of weight to that stuff without any real evidence. The only actual experience that I've had that as of a demonic nature was I was having an experience where, sometimes I've had entities come to me, I think because they can tell that I'm having experiences and then they want to make contact this way. Generally, I have no negative experiences. I keep my vibration very high, positive, loving thoughts, bad things don't happen. But I do believe that there are powerful astral or multidimensional entities that exist on the negative spectrum, because one time this entity came into my consciousness and it was a shape-shifting entity. And so what it was doing is it was going into my mind and pulling out the different things that I'm afraid of. And it was an attempt to concoct the ultimate fearful image of itself to present to me. And so it was doing this simultaneously to attempting to make me obedient to it. So if you study like the cosmic laws of free will and cause and effect, a negative entity can do nothing to you unless you somehow consent to its things that it wants to do against you. So in this case, it was summoning the most horrific image it could think of. And in this case, it had detected that I have a fear of the deep ocean. I have a bit of a fear of sharks, and I have a bit of a fear of rotting things. And so it created for itself a giant rotting shark with like maggots in its mouth and things like that. And it began pulling me toward its mouth with its huge jaws open. And at the same time, it was yelling at me. It was basically saying, "Submit to me now, submit to me now." And it wanted me to agree to submit to it. And if I did, God knows what would have happened to me. But
you got to wonder what the purpose is. Like, are they just parasites leeching off fear energy, or is there some kind of like higher dimensional like learning curve that comes with it? I mean, what's your theory on why they do
that? Negative spectrum, it could be a desire to dominate, to create slaves, to amass power. Because I maybe this entity thought if I could bag somebody like Cyrus who has all these, out of body or astral skills and make him into my slave, that would be great. I could, cause all kinds of mayhem. So if I had submitted to that thing, God knows what would have happened. But I know the way the game works. I know that it's about consent, right? There's this cosmic law of consent. And because of that, I would have to audibly or intentionally submit to it. And basically I looked at it and said, you know what, I'm actually a big fan of horror films, and you did an excellent job of creating this like perfect like horrific creature. I really am terrified. It's really cool. Anyway, I wish you the best. I don't know what you want, and good luck to you. And it really had no course of action against that particular reasoning, and so it scrambled off, and it knew it could do nothing to penetrate me. So
it's like the man behind the curtain at the Wizard of Oz, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, in a sense. But, well, whatever that thing was behind the curtain, I mean, maybe it doesn't even have a physical form. Maybe it's a shape-shifting negative entity that wants power, and who knows. But I think that could be classified as something that is demonic. But that's how you handle those types of entities. I mean, you outframe the situation.
Did you get any problems? I mean, you mentioned in your book about that you had an interest in Aleister Crowley, or one of your friends did, or something. I can't remember the whole thing, but I know that you thought you'd give it a go of trying to contact him in the out-of-body state. Can you talk about that?
Well, in fact, it was Aleister Crowley who decided to give it a go of contacting me while I was in my out-of-body state.
Okay.
So what happened is I also have a friend who does out-of-body stuff, and he was into certain occult subjects. And I guess I didn't reveal this in the book because I don't want people to think ill of him, but I'll go ahead and reveal it here. It was also Kensho, the same guy who kind of helped get me into some of this to begin with, and he was thinking he could learn a thing or two from Crowley, and so we were discussing on this on Skype. And he was in the Czech Republic at the time. I had just been to the Czech Republic, but I'd been back. I was back now in the States, and he was attempting to make contact with Crowley. At the same time, I was researching Crowley a bit because I'm like, well, I think this is a really bad idea, Kensho. But hey, if you really want to do it, go ahead. And I was looking him up a little bit. He was on my mind, but I didn't think too much about it, and I didn't really know much about Crowley. And then I went to sleep, and then I was woken up by the vibrational feeling that I was leaving my body, and I felt somebody kind of pulling me out of my body. Soon I was having an astral experience. I was in like this lavish mansion that I identified as being in the astral counterpart of Hollywood, which was, of course, very close to where I was living. And it was, this very lavish mansion. And this woman came out, and he said, Mr. Crowley would like an audience with you. And I said, okay. And so she takes me through like the foyer of the mansion, up some stairs, and then the experience begins to fade out. And then I'm back in my body, but I'm out of my body. And then there's like this swirling kind of dark mass in the room, and it begins projecting a voice to me. And it's like, hello, Cyrus, this is Aleister Crowley. And, I certainly can't do a British accent, but it sounded like a jolly old British guy. Like that was basically the voice that was coming in. And, we had a conversation for about 20 minutes. And it was a good conversation. We talked about quite a few subjects. He was quite interested in like what I was doing in my book and things of that nature. And when the experience ended, I did some more Googling, and then I found a picture of Crowley with his wife. And I immediately identified the woman I had met in the mansion was his wife, looked just like her. And I didn't even know who she was prior to that. So that definitely confirmed the experience in my mind. And
so the vibe you got off him, did it feel evil? Did it feel gentlemanly? What did it feel?
I mean, I didn't get a bad vibe. I mean, I would say gentlemanly, but there is this darkness about him. There is like, people of his nature, I think they are aligned a bit to the dark spectrum. So there could be motivations to amass power, but I think it's not as, evil as like a demonic entity. From what I know about Crowley is he's quite active among people who do these types of things, as well as people who practice like physical mediumship. I know one physical medium who has been in contact with Crowley, and it seems like his interest is more on like the enlightenment of people. He wants to individually help people learn to overcome a lot of their physical limitations, and I do think that's benevolent. He also likes to keep tabs on people's progress, but at the same time, the guy basically has a cult following on the other side. So my buddy finally got through to Crowley, and he's a very experienced astral traveler. But Crowley didn't actually want to meet my friend. My friend ended up kind of in this like waiting room, or it was this place in the astral of people who were in like a very long queue hoping to meet and speak with Crowley. He described it as a bunch of jerks. So there was a bunch of lowlives hanging around, trying to meet Crowley, trying to
trying to get autographs,
like a fan group.
And so he ended up with a bunch of his fanboys, and it does seem like Crowley has a bit of an intention to get power, feed off of power. A lot of those kind of Luciferian topics, which I think he was quite into in this world. But I mean, personally, I don't have any issues with him. I mean, I enjoyed the chat, but he's definitely quite active, and maybe he does desire a bit about like the idea of individualized godhood, the left hand path of spirituality, which was what he's all about. And I think that does involve ultimately gaining that power and gaining that how do you say it, like amassing that influence upon the mortal realm. And so I think he is doing that. But I wouldn't lose sleep about it. I mean, that's,
Well, he's very controversial. I mean, some people think that he's pure evil. Some people think that he's kind of like just a very clever magician with a big ego. Maybe the truth is somewhere kind of in the middle. Maybe he's not pure evil, but maybe he is kind of quite an egotistical kind of look at me showman.
I mean, I would get that impression a bit. I mean, ultimately, I think of him as a jolly old English guy with a lot to talk about who, he probably has a pretty big ego and likes darkness. And I think I think probably 50% or more of his appearance was marketing. So he was coming on the scene at a time, long before we had pop culture that had we knew about horror films and all kinds of negative dark imagery that was cool. He was coming on the scene as like this Lord of Darkness. I mean, basically long before Ozzy Osbourne.
I was just about to say Ozzy Osbourne of the 19th, 20th century, yeah.
He was coming in as the Prince of Darkness, and so it was a very clever marketing strategy. But at the end of the day, he was a powerful occultist, and he still is an occultist, and he still has that philosophy. So, there certainly is, and I mean, I don't know about evil, but there is a chaotic element to that, and that's not everybody's cup of tea.
I read, I think my ex-wife read this, and she related it back to me. She was reading, I think it was like a book by Aleister Crowley's son, written as an adult, but obviously he was looking back through his childhood of his memories and experiences of being the son of Aleister Crowley. And he had this story in there where he and Aleister Crowley were walking along a very narrow pathway, sort of up a cliff or a hill or a very steep incline of some sort, and they happened to meet two nuns coming the other way. And
this sounds like a joke.
It does sound like a joke, yeah, but it's interesting what happens. Obviously, they came to the point in the middle where there wasn't enough room to walk around each other without sort of falling off this cliff or down the slope at least. So he said, the son said that Aleister Crowley said, "Good afternoon, ladies," or something like that, and he sort of just stepped out into mid-air, taking his son with him, somehow levitating off this cliff face or off this hillside so these two nuns could get past. And they scurried past, frightened out of their wits, down this pathway after seeing what he had done. And then he stepped back onto the path. And that was a story related by his son. But how true it is, I don't know. But I just thought it's an interesting thing to bring up as we're discussing him.
Yeah, that is, I mean, I would say I'd ask Crowley myself, but I have not been in touch with him since that one incident, so I can't necessarily do that. But it is interesting to think about being able to levitate, because I would imagine that being possible outside of like certain like yogis in parts of India or Bangladesh and places like that. Allegedly, they have those powers. And I think, it does require a lot of spiritual work to be able to obtain the ability to do something like that. So I think Crowley, as a dark magician, and like he balances like the spiritual work like that with then taking that ability and then kind of breaking the rules with it and then showing it off and doing stunts like that. So I guess that is the nature of the dark magician.
Now, when I read the book of Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe, my friend told me about the book, and he had started to practice the out-of-body experiences or lessons given at the book, but it came with a bit of a warning. It said, once you've mastered this, or once you've got the hang of this and done these instructions that he gives at the end of the book of how to go out your body, he said it's like a Pandora's box. You won't be able to switch it off. Have you found that's been the case with you?
I would say yes. There has been times when it has switched off, even when I have not wanted it to switch off, because I'll stop having experiences, which means there's fewer things for me to talk about if I'm vlogging or if I'm writing on my Facebook group about it. And I'm like, gosh, it's been 3 weeks. I need to have a good out-of-body experience. But then inevitably it does come back around again, and then you begin having experiences. At the heyday, I was having it so much. I think that's why I shut it off, because I wanted just to have a good night's sleep. I didn't want crazy experiences to happen to me. And so I think I shut it off for a good long time. And since I did that, it's been more difficult to have it as frequently as I used to. But, once in a while, I'll still get the really good one, And it is probably better off this way, because I was becoming quite exhausted when I was having astral experiences like once every day or two.
See, I thought that Neil meant it was the other way around, i.e. instead of like being worried about it switching off, was there situations where it would just switch on where you didn't want it to? And I think you kind of answered that you were getting a little bit too exhausted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So have you had any kind of profound because we dwelled on the negative. Have you had any profound experiences with any very, very positive beings, or, you know, Jesus, Buddha, Moses, whatever you want to call it, whoever there is out there, that have kind of like taught you some quite profound things as well as the negative stuff?
Well, I mean, my first experience, I did meet some teachers at a temple, and they were East Indian, and I wouldn't label them as, I mean, they just regular folks. I mean, I don't know their background, and they taught me quite a few things about out-of-body experiences and what to expect as I would begin having more and more of them. So that was like my initial out-of-body experience. Basically, you know, this guy was like, hey, you're out of body right now. You know, you're going to probably keep doing this a lot. Here's what to expect. And that, of course, was a very positive experience. And I still, you know, remember that lesson, you know, with all my future endeavors. But as far as positive experiences, really, it's been a matter of staying in touch with like deceased loved ones. So like actually, since I wrote that first book, my mom's passed away, one of my brothers has passed away, and my father has passed away. And that's all been the last couple of years. And I've been able to communicate with all of them through out-of-body astral experiences. So that is the most positive element. It's probably why I do the work, because obviously it's helped me tremendously because I can maintain a relationship with my deceased family, but I also can help other people do the same. And so that's what matters to me. I mean, I haven't had much interest in meeting any kind of religious figure or anything like that. My primary interest is just the continuation of relationships with our deceased loved ones. So I guess that if that answers your question, I suppose that is the most overwhelmingly positive element of the practice, and that's a good enough reason to do it.
Mm.
When Robert Monroe tried to communicate with his wife who passed away, he said that he thought he was ready for it, and he actually found, to his shock, that he wasn't. He said it was such a not awful, but very, very emotionally tough to be reunited with his wife not long after she passed away. And I mean, was it a great pleasure to be reunited with your parents out of the body, or was it a real tough cookie to handle?
That's interesting. I think that must relate to a person's kind of emotional countenance, if that's the correct word. So, because I don't feel like that should be the case. With my mom, I was meeting with her before she even fully realized that she had died, and I was helping her along with the process, and and helping her become adjusted to living in this new dimension. And so certainly there was never a moment where it was difficult to be around her. And with other deceased loved ones, no, I mean, it's always, I've never had that issue. It's always been, really great. And I tend to approach situations very matter-of-factly. And so if I'm encountering somebody that I knew on this side, I'm basically like, hey, what's going on? Give them a hug, hang out and chat, and be like, uh-oh, I'm waking up, gotta go. And, it's a good time. I guess, again, it has to do with like one's emotional countenance. So that's not really an issue. It probably shouldn't be an issue. And I almost wonder, for Monroe, for him to have had such an issue with that, it could be related to his relationship. It could also be related to preconceived ideas about death. So even people who are into out-of-body experiences, sometimes they're not really fully comprehending the afterlife. Like they haven't connected all the dots. I know people who practice out-of-body states, and they do it entirely as like a component of a Buddhist philosophy, or they're having entirely like transcendental experiences that don't involve anybody on that side. And they're not looking at it at all as like life after death. And to some people, it can be a shock to find out that your deceased loved ones are still alive and well, even people who practice the out-of-body experiences. And I noticed, like with the Monroe Institute, with Monroe as well as Bullman and Tom Campbell especially, there was always this kind of clinical element to all of it. Like they weren't looking at it practically. They weren't looking at it like, hey, this is a chance to hang out with Grandpa again, have a drink with him at the Astral Pub. they were looking at it so like, yeah, so like clinically, scientifically, and just thinking about it nuts and bolts, kind of like how do you get to higher levels of consciousness and things of that nature. I feel like sometimes they were missing the point of like human interaction and the things that really matter to us on an emotional level. And I wonder if that could be related to why Monroe had that feeling. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I guess it's almost like he's trying to map the astral experience, because I think by about the third book, he went completely different and almost off tangent, really. But he was calling the different locations, locale 1, locale 2, locale 3, referring to wherever he ended up. And I think he called locale 1, which was here and now on the Earth plane. Locale 2, I think he thought was maybe outside in the astral zones or somewhere. And locale 3 might have been equal to other dimensions. I don't know if he said the word dimensions. I can't remember. It's a year since I've read the book. But he appeared a lot of times being in alternative versions of Earth, more so than any spirit world, which is an interesting concept. It was almost if he was going to like counterpoints or counterparts of Earth streams or alternative Earths, where I think in one journey he went on a bus that seemed to be made of wood, and he tried to pay money to the driver, who looked at him strangely.
Well, actually, no. So I have almost like a slightly different interpretation, because I've had the same experiences as, when he was describing the focus states. So, excuse me. So with these counterparts to Earth. So in my books, I sometimes call it the second Earth. And so this is, in fact, literally, when we talk about the quote spirit world, that is a part of it. And it is the most common place in my experience where people go when they kick the bucket. And essentially how it works is like this. So just like you have an astral body, the entire planet, in a sense, has its own astral body. So there is a counterpart to every location on this planet on the astral side. So there is an astral London, and there is astral Los Angeles, and the entire geography of the planet has an astral counterpart. And so if you're having an astral experience and you find yourself in London, I think for somebody who doesn't know what's going on, they may be very confused by that, because they won't understand, hey, I'm supposed to be in the spirit world, so I'm supposed to be floating around as a ball of light, and there's supposed to be mythical creatures flying around, and it's supposed to be like prismatic colors in the air and all this kind of mystical stuff that I think we conceptualize, and we don't realize that the spirit world could actually be like a suburban neighborhood, or it could be a bunch of buildings and restaurants, because the higher density realm, some people call it the fourth density, the next wavelength directly above this one, still looks like this one, and it has all the same geographic counterpoints. And most people, when they die, that's where they end up. And a lot of people who die don't, they can barely comprehend that they have died, because it's kind of like life goes back to normal. And there's a lot of differences on that side. To telepathic communication, you can manifest things by thought, you can do a lot of things you can't do here, but it's not like a completely alien world. And so so Monroe had been to a lot of these places, as has William Bullman, and I think in a sense they've all had a difficult time comprehending how that works. Like, it's difficult to wrap your mind around the fact that the so-called spirit world isn't really a spirit world as much as it is just a counterpart to the planet we're on right now. And I will say, I'm quite into that, because, that counterpart is a lot more fun and a lot more of a cool place than this world. Imagine only having to work, doing the stuff you like to do, and being able to explore anything you want, do anything you want. I know there's a lot of Harry Potter fans out there, if they want to recreate Hogwarts and go live in that world. And on the astral side of Earth, you can literally do things like that. And so there's all kinds of a diversity of experiences that you can have, and that also, I think, adds a little bit to confusion too, because it's like, people can have these weird experiences, and they're like, "What's going on?" Like, I was in Hogwarts. Is that how could I have been in Hogwarts? Well, people recreate all this stuff because people want to have fun.
And we're going into very, very odd territory here, because there could even be kind of like different realities simultaneously going on at the same time. And we're going into kind of like Mandela effect type territory here. But also, have you heard of the Japanese incident where there was a man who landed in an airport who said he was from Taured, Taured, and he presented a passport from a country that doesn't exist in this world anyway. Have you come across that at all, Cyrus? It was in 1954.
Well, the thing is that when we talk about the Mandela effect, we talk about, in this case, alternate realities and things of that nature. I mean, those types of realities would very much be, if they did exist, places in this density, this kind of third density. But I also see there's a lot of relationships between what we call the astral world or the spirit world, the fourth density, whatever you want to call it, and the world we're in right now. So, because what's going on is basically it's these multidimensional layers. So yeah, your grandpa passes away, and then he goes off to live in the astral side of Earth, and we think of that as heaven, but in reality, it's just a different dimension. And so the dimensions could have entire governments; they could have entire civilizations. Yeah. Now, when we like the UFO phenomenon, a lot of people hypothesize, and it makes sense to me, that a lot of these UFOs are coming from these other dimensions. So the UFO might have a switch on it that basically you can switch between this density and the next density. So, so that UFO could be coming from an astral dimension that we have in our astral experiences, because they have the technology to just kind of go between these different realms. So maybe it's even possible that somebody from an astral dimension could somehow end up in this dimension, be from some unknown civilization, or there could be other dimensions from this specific density where there is some kind of a portal or something along those lines. But it's all quite speculative. I mean, I don't know about this Japanese incident. That could all be a bunch of rubbish for all I know. So I have no idea.
It could be. Look into it. It's Taured, Taured. It's one of the kind of like the mysteries in the world that no one quite knows what was going on. But apparently he spoke French. He landed at Haneda Airport in Japan in 1954, presenting a passport from this Taured place. And with loads of stamps of places that don't exist, and it's just very bizarre. I mean, it could be a made up story, but there's quite a few reports on it. Who knows? It goes back round to that. Goes back round to what you believe in and what you can find proof in. It's just the most bizarre thing.
Sounds like one of those urban myths. You get all these different things of.
Well, it could be. I mean, there may well be variations of it. In other countries and other tales, but.
The way to get to the bottom of that would be to get some good remote viewers, because basically consciousness, you can place it anywhere in time and space, or non-time and non-space. So somebody who's talented at remote viewing, a bunch of people, they could get together and hone in on this Taured place, and then they could glean specific facts about whether it exists, and if it does exist, and where is it. So there's actually another one that's really interesting that has got some evidence behind it, but in a slightly different way. So I don't know if you've heard of this story. Andrew Carlson in New York. Let me just find this. So this Andrew Carlson was busted. He was kind of arrested for insider trading, apparently, because he kept placing bets on the New York Stock Exchange and kept winning money and kind of doing very, very well. And the authorities thought he had some kind of insider secrets. And he basically said that he was a time traveler from the future, and he knew how things were going to turn out. Again, it's one of these things. This is it. He claims he's from the year 2256. But who knows?
Fantastic. Well, we're going to have to take a break. We'll do a little bit of time traveling ourselves, and we'll be back after these commercial minutes.
Hi, this here is Maynard from down south in Tennessee, and my family came to this country on the Mayflower. So I embraced my British roots by listening to the Paranormal UK radio network. Boy, howdy, now I gotta go get me some pork rinds.
Hello and welcome back to the Paranormal Peep Show, and we're talking with Andy, of course, and Cyrus Kirkpatrick, all about understanding life after death, of which he is the author of a book of that name. And we were talking, first of all, in part one about Cyrus's out-of-body experiences and how he's made contact with members of his family. But there's obviously not everyone can do out-of-body journeying like Cyrus and other great pioneers of that technique. So for the rest of us, there's ways of communicating with the afterlife, which is through various ways of mediumship. So Cyrus, you've obviously been looking into the whole thing of mediumship. Can you explain to our listeners what types that you've come across and which ones you favour?
Well, of course, we have the mediumship that people know about and love, that you see on TV shows all the time, which is mental mediumship. And I believe some of you guys practice that as well. It is, of course, creating a telepathic link with the other side. And this is really a normal means of communication with people on that side. So it's kind of talking in their language and then making that contact and being able to describe the impressions from that side. But that is only one kind of mediumship. So we also have elements of physical mediumship where essentially a person's whole body becomes a vehicle of the spirit side, and then supernatural things happen in the room once the spirit is using that person's body. I forgot to mention there's also trance mediumship. And so after mental mediumship, we have a trance mediumship where somebody goes into a trance and it is essentially taken over by a entity from that side. And then we have, as I mentioned, a physical mediumship. And an element of physical mediumship is a direct voice mediumship. And so this is when essentially someone's mouth is taped shut. They have no way to speak, but then typically in the dark, an ectoplasmic voice box manifests into the room, and then voices begin coming out of that box. And it could be, in this case, deceased loved ones and things like that. More traditional physical mediumship is a more of a contentious area, but that involves a medium going into a trance during a seance, typically in the dark. They may produce ectoplasm out of their bodies, just like in Ghostbusters, but they got that info from somewhere. That would be the spiritualist lore. And then this ectoplasm may form into partially materialized bodies, arms, hands, limbs, or whole figures that will then allegedly interact with people in the seance room. And this has been widely practiced since the 1900s, with also a long, troublesome history of people cashing in on it as basically stage tricks, magicians basically getting involved in that field, realizing they might be able to make a buck if people think that all this stuff is happening when the lights go off. So it's a difficult world to navigate, but there's a couple of mediums who have came out of that era who I believe, they were not frauds. And this is, becomes a very interesting subject when you hone in on the legitimate elements of it.
So for you, obviously doing the research for your books and to kind of convince yourself, is there a reality to this whole life after death thing? What kind of personal readings have you had with mediums that you thought, yeah, this is they're definitely a good medium or very accurate, and it's kind of proved or given you enough evidence to think that there is definitely something out there?
Well, I mean, still ultimately, mental mediumship, if it's a really good mental medium, they will disprove any doubt that you have. And let's say even 10% of the mental mediums are authentic, or at least, even if somebody who doesn't think that they're illegitimate, they may still be, because they may be channeling nothing more than their imagination and then thinking that they are connecting with the other side. So it's a bit difficult to find the real thing. But I have had readings like with Suzanne Wilson, and I don't believe she takes public readings anymore, but she was very well known because she had some of the most convincing types of readings of anybody out there. I mean, I would love to get some of these media skeptics, some of these like Michael Shermer's or Brian Cox types of people, if they could have a private one-on-one session with Suzanne Wilson, I think that would totally change their opinions. Like, I was going to say James Randi. I don't even know if he's still alive anymore, because I think he's like 96 or something. But all it takes is one session with somebody like that to remove any doubt. And with Suzanne Wilson, I mean, she was like, to give you an idea, Suzanne Wilson was able to describe back to me personal experiences that I had, as an example, like in an astral state that nobody else knew about. And it's like, yeah, Cyrus, when you were in that like hospital type setting to visit your mom as she was recovering, she wanted you to know this and that. It's like, well, nobody else knew about me having that out of body experience except for me. So she was not only confirming my out of body / astral projection experiences, she was, confirming about the, that she really was in contact with people on that side, and that, she has the ability to do it. So with mental mediumship, yes. And then, in the book I go into, I talk a little bit about some of the more reputed like physical mediums who I believe were legitimate. And, among them would be like Leslie Flint, if you want to talk about that. I don't know.
I think though, from experience with mediumship with myself, I think when you get somebody who's super skeptic, it's almost like they block themselves. And it's interesting what you talk about, the universal aspect of consent. I think that's really important. So the people who get really good readings, I think, are the ones who really want them or need them in their life. And when you get people who block it, and I've had people who deliberately block it, either for their own kicks or their own fun, or sometimes to justify their own position that it's all a load of rubbish. So I think if somebody like Brian Cox or James Randi did go to Susan, I don't think she'd be able to kind of actually tune into them unless they genuinely went with a genuinely open heart. And I don't think they would. I think they would go with a view to debunk her, a view to clarify their own positions, that it's all a load of rubbish. And I think that might put a block, because they're not really consenting to a reading because it's not what they really want. What would you say to that?
I think that's probably the most well put description of that phenomenon that I've heard. Totally think that is the case. They would need to, as part of the protocol, like at least attempt to play along and provide that consent. But you're right, because they have like this deep troubled sense in their heart that they don't want. I don't know, but I actually think it has to do with maybe like some kind of childhood abuse. They don't want to be let down by the universe, and so they feel like they have to make real things not be real because they don't want to be disappointed. So there was a weird pathology behind that, but ultimately because of that, they wouldn't open their hearts, they wouldn't give something the time of day, and then they'd be able to further add that to their list of things that they claim have been debunked. But yeah, it wouldn't, that universal law of consent. And this is almost going off of left field a little bit. But when we talk about that cosmic consensual law, and sometimes maybe we should think a little bit about what things are we consenting to, because, if we want to go very David Icke, we can talk about, how is it that powers that be could get the best of us? How are we being manipulated in such a way that we are consenting to things that we don't even understand that we are consenting to? So I'll let everybody choose that one.
Literally the 1% control the many, because the many don't do anything about it. Most don't realize they're under control. Some actually actively realize it's control, but they want to be the top of the rat pack kind of thing. It's almost like rats scrabbling up the ship mast as the ship is sinking, is the analogy I'd use.
I thought you said ship.
Ship with a P, yeah. It's
Go on, Andy. What?
Sorry, it's a bit like kind of like the Nazi and the Soviet military. It's the fight for survival. At any moment, Stalin or Hitler could order your death. So you kind of you're scrabbling to the top. And it's this survivalist thing that's kind of like, I think it's driving the world and the world powers. Everyone wants to be above everyone else. So rather than collectively saying, let's all come together and let's all kind of like unify against darkness, a lot of people, and especially the psychopaths in the business, corporations and political spheres, end up kind of joining the dark side, so to speak, and climbing their way up the ladder. And I think actually that also reflects in the spiritual world as well. So going back to Crowley, and probably darker entities than him, I think they maybe realise that they're stuck and they can't really kind of like, well, at least they think they can't evolve. They probably can in reality, but think they can't evolve. And so because they're kind of stuck in a certain realm, they and this is why I will use the word, shit on everyone else below them. And that's when you get things like demonic possessions and, poltergeist hauntings and that kind of thing. I don't know what you think of that, Cyrus.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say what the motivation of the dark side is. I think that it could be a viable explanation. I also feel like there's this reverse spectrum, kind of like we have virtues, right? Compassion, love, empathy, justice, whatnot. And I feel like there's like these anti-virtues, right? Like domination or jealousy or whatnot. And yet these kind of anti-virtues seem to have a power of their own that you can pursue them and then obtain like mastery over those like dark principles. And then that's what the dark side does. And so, you have like some kind of a demonic entity that wants to control and dominate, and it's going to be on that path and become better and better at doing what it likes to do, which is dominate people. So that is the weird allure of that. And, it's frightening stuff. I mean, I know these types of entities exist in the universe, and maybe there is maybe it exists in some way to balance the light, because how would we understand what freedom is without some entity out there attempting to dominate people? Yeah. And then that provides some kind of a cosmic contrast in a sense. But I really don't know. I mean, it's outside my pay grade almost. I
wonder if these dark things are actually aspects of ourselves, like the vast unconscious, and we're just facing mirrors. I've kind of read that in other books. But we did speak about physical mediumship earlier on, and when you talked about direct voice mediumship, you also spoke about trance, and in your book you mentioned about the UK medium Leslie Flynn. And I was very fascinated to read about his accounts, and I know that his supporters, if you like, people that are trying to carry on his name for research, have got a website with his recordings that he did over a 30-40 year period, I think it was, on reel-to-reel tape recorders back then in the 60s and things. So do you want to tell us a little bit about Leslie Flynn?
Well, yeah. So Flint was perhaps one of the most tested mediums of all time. So basically, the claim was that he could produce voices in the dark, but they were independent of his own vocal cords. So he would produce like this ectoplasmic thing. Voices would come through and talk to the audience. And the Society for Psychic Research investigated him a number of times. So initially they sent a couple of guys in, and then they came back basically saying, well, our professional estimate is that he's a fraud. There's no way this could be possible. And that was basically the summary of their argument. Like this isn't real because it can't be real, kind of circular reasoning. And that report is still used if you want to go to like disinformation websites like Wikipedia that say Leslie Flynn was a medium proven false by the Society for Psychic Research in 1962, and that's it. End of story. Well, what ended up happening is they kept researching Flint, and they wanted to test to see if the voices were really independent. So they did a seance where they had him put a bunch of colored water in his mouth. And so then they carried on with the seance, and at the end of the seance, he spit the colored water out into a glass to show that it wasn't him doing some kind of ventriloquism. And this was in some ways exonerated him, because the debunkers had noticed I think they had attempted to bind his mouth or something along those lines, and then at some point during the seance, he had to get out of the binding. Well, that's because he was struggling to breathe. So some of us have this kind of condition where we don't breathe so easily through our nostrils. I'm kind of this way, and Flint was kind of this way, and so that's why it was a bit difficult for him to undergo those tests, because he doesn't want to suffocate. And so because that had happened initially during an initial experiment, that's why they decided that he was a fraud. But then we did the colored water experiment, and then there was no way to explain that. So there's been a lot of tests. I think they may have tested his vocal cords as well for vibrations, and a lot of ways to determine that the voices were independent. And of course, with professional searching of the room, you won't, they would have discovered, especially back in the 60s, if there was some kind of a mechanism that was playing things back. I mean, this isn't the days of, there were no like iPhones you can hide that could be playing a recording, So he was pretty well scientifically established. And then he continued the voices from like sometime around the late 40s all the way up to right about 1990 when he passed away. And so many of the recordings, quite a bit is available on like YouTube through the Leslie Flint Trust. And so the thing about the recordings is, I know you're kind of a voice guy. There's always initial skepticism because many of the male voices sound similar, and they all have this kind of deep, throaty sound about them. And so I think it's important to keep in mind that basically what Flint says is that this ectoplasmic voice box is created as a mold out of his own vocal cords. So many of the voices do sound similar, but they are being produced even while his mouth is either taped shut or, it's being verified sometimes through like red light that he's not speaking. So there is that paranormal element. And one thing I do like about Flint is that when there is a female voice, it sounds like a female voice. So it doesn't sound like somebody doing a bad, an old Scottish guy doing a bad impersonation of a soft-spoken female. It actually sounds like a female. So with all that out of the way, you can go into the lore behind Flint. You can begin listening to many of the recordings, and you have a lot of detailed information about the other side. And among that includes the Annie Nanji tapes, where this Indian doctor, he began attending Flint seances and receiving contact by his Swedish wife, who had passed away from cancer. And so they continued their relationship for about 10 plus years by him going to Flint seances, and then she could identify everything he did that morning. It's like, oh, darling, I love the flowers you put out. I really love the carnations. The painting above the bed, I noticed you put that there for me. So it's all this stuff that, like this old medium, unless he had like a team of spies, like sneaking into people's houses. I mean, there was no way he'd be able to know these things. And you can listen to them basically carry on the relationship between the Veil and, for about, there's like 10 years of that. And that's a lot of fun to listen to. It's highly evidential and gives a lot of hope to people, who've lost their spouses.
And
so
what happened after the 10 years? Was there any reason for it to come to an end?
That's a good question. I'm not so sure what brought the Annie Nanji sessions to a close. I mean, it's possible that Dina maybe passed away. It's possible that was about the time that the Flint sessions began to come to a close. I don't know if that was about 1990 or not, because eventually Flint passed away, or he got too old and he just stopped doing the session. So I don't know the full history behind that, but I do know there was about 10 years of recordings between them that you can listen to.
What a legacy. I mean, it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this ectoplasm, which is drawn out of the medium and the sitters in the room, was forming into a kind of facsimile of a human vocal box. But was it in a, like what they call a seance trumpet, which is like a cardboard cone?
It was not. So they have red light images of the alleged voice box. So you will see like this kind of slimy looking thing appearing on Flint's like left shoulder, and it'll just be hanging out there with him. So he'll be strapped to a chair. Maybe he'll have tape around his mouth or whatnot, and then there's like this slimy looking thing that's like appearing on his shoulder basically, and then that's where the voices would be coming out of.
It sounds like a night out at the Bohemian Grove.
Wow. I mean, it does sound remarkable. I mean, is there any medium like that today? I mean, you've mentioned to us in the break that you've been to see some physical mediums at a special event. Was anything like that convincing for you today?
Yeah, I mean, I was quite impressed by David Thompson. I went to a session with him a couple of months back. And, I mean, probably like what makes Flint stand out is the fact you could like see this voice box like in red light. So the claims could be verifiable. Even with Thompson, it's all in the pitch darkness. But there's things that just, becomes more and more difficult to disprove. So Thompson being like a full ectoplasmic medium. So like instead of making a voice box, the ectoplasm will form into a whole person. So I had like his main guide or partner, William, who David's a bit of a short guy. And so this person, William, came into the seance and we had a chat. He came up to me and kind of ruffled my hair with his huge hand. And basically, it might be the darkness, but I could feel this guy like towering over me. And like my heart was beating into my throat. It was such a crazy experience. And I'm there having a chat about like some kind of like metaphysical stuff. I'm asking him about like his world and some specific details about it. But it's like, there's like this 6'4" guy, and even though it's dark, like you can feel this huge guy over you. And Thompson is my height. He's not that tallest guy, but maybe like 5'9", maybe even a bit shorter than me. So something's going on with that. And then they turn the lights off and he begins like teleporting around the room. So like he's strapped to his chair, they turn the lights off, they turn the lights back on, and then like he's still strapped to his chair, but he's like 15 feet away, and then they turn the lights off, and then he's in a different spot, and like what the heck's going on? And then you have like we had somebody come through, and I talk about this actually on my blog or on the main website afterlifetopics.com. I did a bit of a report about it, but we had Konstantin Rodiv come through, and he was a pioneer of electronic voice phenomenon. And so we had probably the world's most eminent EVP/ITC researcher, Sonia Rinaldi, present with us. And then Rodiv comes through and he starts giving her all these technical specs because he considers to be like her boss. And so he comes through and gives her some advice to help with her experiments. And so that was quite convincing as well. So, I would definitely say I was impressed by that. I've been to other physical seances before too. Maybe wasn't as impressed by, but I would definitely mark that one as I would say that one was interesting. Very possibly real.
And is there video evidence of David Thompson performing these things, like you mentioned earlier about the voice box appearing on? I forgot his names already. On his shoulders. Who is it?
Flint. Leslie Flint.
Leslie Flint. Sorry, yeah, my mind's going a bit stretched tonight. I think I need some ectoplasm in my mind to keep me going. So, is there any way of kind of capturing infrared footage of David Thompson manifesting these beings? Because this is the big criticism I've heard of people saying, well, in today's age of video, infrared technology, H definition TV, cameras, that sort of stuff. Surely we've got some video footage of these spirits manifesting. If you can film animals in the darkness of night for Spring Watch programs, UK TV series like that you can definitely, presumably, capture spirits coming out of a seance cabinet walking around a room, surely.
Surely, you would think with a red light. That they're very, very picky about that. They claim even red light, could destroy an ectoplasmic apparition, and then it would all shoot back into David's body and kill him. So that's the claim that they make in all ectoplasmic circles, that if the ectoplasm is exposed to light, it disintegrates it, and then the ectoplasm is being produced like by the pancreas or something, it'll shoot back into the body and leave you, if not crippled, it could leave you dead.
Well, so that is Slimer in Ghostbusters, so
Stop. In Ghostbusters 2, they had a whole swoop full of it, and that was so that's the scientific evidence right there that it should be able to see it in light. But anyway, so that's the claim that they make. And interesting thing is, with David Thompson, there really isn't any video evidence I'm aware of, and obviously that's something that critics hone in on. And to be fair, I've been quite critical of him as well because of that reason. Now, he has a contemporary named Kai Mueg. I think I'm pronouncing his name terribly, but that's out of Germany. And he has a lot of video footage. And so you can see there's photos all over the web. I think it was the Felix Circle. I think it's like felixcircle.blogspot.com. And they have there's images of this guy, like this big, tall dude, like wearing kind of like a turban or something. and he's hanging out in the seance room, and this was like a materialization of somebody. And it's a very interesting looking image. I mean, there's kind of something kind of otherworldly looking about this guy. And a lot of things. There's like partial materializations, which are also quite convincing. There's lots of photographic stuff about all of that Kai is doing. At the same time, I've also heard people very skeptical of Kai after attending seances with him. So it's a little bit difficult. I'm not too sure what to believe or who to believe. But when it comes to the photographic evidence, it's definitely that Felix circle of Germany that is providing all of that. But David Thompson, unfortunately, I don't believe has. He's a bit reclusive with his seances. You don't see much like publicity about it. You don't see him putting out many audio sessions online or evidence or things like that. So he's definitely a bit reclusive. Maybe not as inviting to the scientific approach. Although I will say, a great SBR researcher in the early 2000s named Montague Keene did a thorough investigation of Thompson and concluded that he was legitimate. And then Keene began coming through Thompson shortly after he passed away suddenly. And those recordings, if they can still be found, are interesting because it sounds just like Montague Keene talking. And I believe he reunited with his wife, and he basically was like, "It's all real, everybody. All the stuff I talked about the afterlife. It's just like I said it was, and a lot more." And it was very, very interesting recordings. But that was back around the early 2000s.
It's interesting. Montague Keene was featured in this documentary that I've seen on YouTube called The Afterlife Experiments, I think it is.
To do with skulls. That's
right, to do with skull, because he investigated the skull thing. We've actually had an interview with Robin Foy do a talk for us on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, our sister show, with Robin Foy of the Skull Experiment, talking about his experiences. And Montague Keene was involved in the investigations of that, but he's featured in this YouTube video where they're talking about these skull experiments. But in fact, during the making of that documentary is when he actually passed away. So the filmmakers decided to try and get a medium to actually communicate with him in the afterlife. And I think it was quite a successful communication. It wasn't crystal clear, but this medium, who had no knowledge about who these team were, was coming through with the irony. She says, "I feel there's a great sense of irony with this man's passing. This is what he's telling me." Because apparently when he passed over, he was actually at a conference to do with life after death or consciousness or something like that. And he actually fell dead at this thing. So this is why he's coming through saying, "What an irony that I died at one of those things," you see.
Yeah, he had a heart attack. I knew his wife for a bit, Veronica Keene.
Did you? Oh. So did she survive him then and then die later?
No, she's still around. As far as I know, she's still around.
Yeah, she does. She's had a blog for many years with like communication with Montague. But I believe that she attended David Thompson's seances and that they would have like physical reunions, is what she would say. I've listened to the recordings, and like I said, it was very convincing with Montague coming through David Thompson. There's reasons to be a bit critical of David Thompson. There's definitely people who are very critical of him. But, it's also easy to focus on the negative because there's been some really good hits, like with Montague. There's been alleged communicators who people have criticized, like either don't sound close enough to how they were or like couldn't verify anything. Like Harry Houdini would come through David Thompson, and he received quite a bit of criticism about that. But I can't recall the specifics of what it was.
No, Veronica actually says, and she was adamant that going back to this handshaking thing, she said that this figure appeared from behind the curtain with dim lighting that looked like Winston Churchill, and apparently went round and shook everyone's hands and sounded like Winston Churchill. So it sounds pretty unbelievable, but who knows, really? Who knows?
David Thompson?
I don't know. It was definitely a physical medium. To be honest, I've forgotten who it was.
I think that Churchill's come through David Thompson, as well as very commonly Louis Armstrong, the great singer, Hello Dolly. So allegedly Louis Armstrong appeared when we did my seance with Thompson, and basically, it sure sounded like Louis Armstrong talking. There was much less indistinction about the voice with Thompson. It sounded like a big African American dude. He came in and sang and tap danced and put on the show for us, and then like, thank you everybody, and then he, then he dematerialized, and so I mean, again, it's pretty difficult to wrap one's mind around. But I will say, if it's fake, then it's like the highest caliber of a fake performance that I could possibly think of. That it would involve, I think, basically a high budget operation to get right, and many, 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 many years of like perfecting all the elements of it. And if that is the case, it seems like for that much work, coming and doing a seance and, basically just covering the cost of travel, I mean, I actually attended that seance for free. I was a guest. So, I mean, I don't know what money he's making, but I don't think it could possibly justify the amount of work that would be involved to fake some of the stuff that, I can see in his seances. I only attended one seance, but, just with that one seance alone, I mean, like if he had become like a stage magician, he could be going on tour and making millions of dollars. So it doesn't make any sense to me.
I did read somewhere, I think on the internet, a kind of statement made by some guy who was some sort of engineer. Didn't really sort of specify, but I'm assuming some sort of technical, mechanical engineering type of person who had been to a David Thompson seance, and I believe it was down at the Banyan Tree, which is near Ashford in Kent, which is in the far east side of the United Kingdom, on the southeast coast towards Dover. And I think David Thompson's done quite a few seances there. I'd love to go to one down there, and I know they do sometimes around the Christmas point. But Andy, if you're interested in going there, that's the place to go to see him. Okay.
When does how often does he do them?
I think he does them a few times a year. So what it's worth doing, and that's for anyone listening, is to look up the Banyan Tree in Ashford in Kent. And they'll have a list of workshops, events, and things they do. I've been there once, many years ago. But, I'd certainly go with you if you wanted to go.
I'd be up for that.
Yeah.
So Dave, Cyrus, you're saying that you've got reservations about Dave Thompson. Was that right, or was it someone else you're talking about? I'm trying to get my head down.
I've been to a couple other physical seances. Like I won't name names. And I certainly wouldn't say that they were fake. I also think that there's this weird gray area where somebody can kind of think that they're a physical medium, and what's happening is that they're going into trance, and then something kind of takes over their body, and at a certain point, like they don't even know what's happening anymore, and they're making all these claims about like physical phenomena happening, but like they're in trance and they don't even know what's happening, and maybe you're running around, putting on this show and pretending to be all these personalities, but it's almost like a kind of spirit possession. And that I kind of feel like that is what's happening with some of these physical mediums. There was somebody who was caught. It might have been at the Banyan Retreat. I don't recall, but somebody was caught a couple of years back by people who were suspecting that there was some kind of funny business going on, and so somebody
Gary Mannion or something like
Barry Manilow.
Yeah, I tend not to name names, but I don't prevent.
Named already. His name's out on the doorstep of everybody in the spiritualist movement. But yeah,
I don't prevent other people from naming names. But that individual, yes, was basically caught out with like an infrared camera of like running around the seance room. But when I thought about it afterwards, I wouldn't necessarily subscribe that guy is like a conscious fraud, like he may in fact be a medium, and he may in fact be thinking he's helping people, and he may in fact be going into trance. But what's happening is like he's being possessed by who knows what. Like his body is being taken over, kind of like with trance mediumship. And, whatever is doing it doesn't really care about like protocol or scientific scrutiny or materializing. It's like whatever is taking control of someone's body is just having you run around and cause some mischief and have fun, and they don't even I think sometimes they don't even realize it. So I almost encourage to be a bit sympathetic to people like that instead of saying, oh, they're a fraud. It's more like they're, a very undeveloped physical medium, and they're making a huge mockery of themselves. And, because I do think that people have, especially historically, done this type of thing for money, and that they fake the whole thing. I think these days it's more likely to be a gray area where it's kind of like I say, they're running around like a chicken with their head cut off, and they don't even know what's happening because they're in trance. So that's one way to look at it.
It's funny you should say that, Cyrus, because that's actually what happened to Colin Fry. He's passed on. He had lung cancer, I think, but I thought he was a decent chap. I did actually speak to Colin for a while, and he seemed like a decent gentleman. But apparently he got caught out in inverted commas because he had a physical mediumship session, and he had a trumpet on a table, and it was dark. And I think it's something along the lines of people or a skeptic switched on the lights when the trumpet was playing, and he had the trumpet in his hand and playing it. I think that was the story. And Colin basically said that, oh yes, but I was actually under the influence of spirit, and spirit made me pick it up and play the trumpet. So you could be right. It could be a bit of a grey area with that.
Yeah, because look, there was a medium who I think is the nicest guy. I support his work, but I had this strong feeling at a session with him that the materializations was him walking around on all fours and stuff like that. And but I don't think he's aware of it. And I think that sometimes it's almost like, well, a couple of things could be happening. One is that spirit is taking control, and they just don't care. And number two, sometimes when it comes to conscious fraud, I think if somebody is under intense pressure to perform and they're just having a bad night, they might have that strong pressure to pick up the trumpet themselves, or try to carry it along because they don't want to disappoint the audience, especially if the audience is paying money. So now we go into probably the issue with the financial motive behind physical mediumship, because it creates a condition where even a good-natured person could end up dipping into the territory of fraud because they feel the pressure to have to put on a good show. And, they're like, everyone's peers paid $100 to see me, and if I don't make something happen, then I'm not being able to pay rent this month. You know what I mean?
I think you're right, and I think that I don't know if you're aware of the UK shows that we've got, like Most Haunted and other shows like that. I thought Most Haunted started out okay. I thought it was like a pretty good show at the beginning, and then it began to kind of ramp it up more and more and became more theatrical with a certain medium. Derek Acora, I think Derek Acora started out genuine, and I think he was okay. But then it got more and more kind of possessions and kind of theatrical and running around all over the place. And it then, I think sometimes if there's a ghost hunt, and I don't know if you've been on ghost hunt, Cyrus, but sometimes they can be active and sometimes they can be completely dead. Pardon the pun, deliberate pun. They could be completely inactive. They could be totally quiet and nothing happens. And I think if you're filming for 24 hours and you've got a medium and a film crew and all that kind of thing, and not exactly a budget but a time scale to get something out, you can't just have an hour or 2 hours of a show of nothing happening. So I think maybe there could be a temptation maybe to amp things up a little bit by I don't know, I don't want to say it, but maybe fraudulently doing things. Well,
not just a temptation, more like the producer comes in and says, okay guys, this has got to stop. Are you good with ventriloquism? Are you good at whatever? I think it's straight up fraud as a way, because that's show business. It does make me think though about how much I like the original Ghost Hunters on the Sci-Fi Channel, because they have a whole season where half the episodes they're going to people's houses and coming back with no evidence. But that was part of the deal, because they'd be like, oh, we're happy to say that there is no ghost in your house. We were here for overnight and we picked up no evidence. Nothing happened. You have a bad heater, or you have a bad, you have a bad, whatever it is, hot
running around
or something, rats or something. That's phenomenon. So that's the way it should be. And it's a shame if ghost hunting TV, I think, broke away from that, because I mean, I know Ghost Hunters was a very highly rated show while it was doing that kind of protocol for a number of seasons, but I don't know. I think maybe these days shows have broken away from that a bit.
Yeah. No, recently, funnily enough, I have been getting back into Most Haunted just to see what's going on, because I used to watch it a lot in the early 2000s, and then it just got a little bit ridiculous and I came away from it. I've got back into it just to see what's going on in that kind of arena. What's really interesting is that now they're getting a lot of activity. So it used to be in the past just the odd orb and a bit of a creaking door. Now they've got doors slamming, they've got objects being thrown all over the place, they've got actually seeing apparitions and things. So there's either two possibilities: either they're upping up the fraudulent nature, if that's what they were doing, and I'm not saying they are, but if that was happening, they've amped that up, or they're tuning into now a paranormal resonance where it's kicking off even bigger than it was before. And I tell you the difference now of what they're doing that they didn't before. They've actually got a demonologist called Fred. He's got a little pointy beard, he's got a little suit and a medallion and a polo neck, and he's actually not, looks like a nice guy, and he sounds like a nice guy. But what he's doing, he's actually doing Latin incantations to bring about demons. So,
literally speaking, oh god.
So, and it only occurred to me
in the name of television.
Yeah, it only occurred to me that's what he was doing when they started referring to it, and he started saying, "Oh yes, I brought up this demon." So it could be argued again. It could be the fraudulent thing that's going on, or it could be that everything is amped up because we're not just on an astral, etheric kind of like ghosty spirit level. Maybe we're on a completely different level. Maybe this is demonic entities that really can do a lot of chaos and things. And it's really hard to tell. Neil and Cyrus, I don't know if you get, well, Neil obviously will because you're in the UK, but Cyrus, if you get the chance to have a look at the latest UK Most Haunted ones, see what you think. See what you think, whether it's genuine haunting activity going on or whether you think they've amped up the fraud, because it's really hard to tell. My end.
Well, I will say if they have a pointy-haired guy coming in who's, first of all, a demonologist shouldn't be in the business of summoning demons, right? So a demonologist should be in the business of working with a priest or whatever. And a lot of that is existing like in a paradigm of there being like kind of like fundamentalist mainstream religion. Like if you watch a film like The Conjuring, like it's coming from that mainstream perspective of God, angels, demons, this kind of thing, which has grains of truth behind it. But there's also like almost like an element of role play behind it too. But nonetheless, can absolutely, I think you could bring about, if there's again a universal law of consent, if a bunch of people consent to bringing in some negative entity, like I spoke about way earlier in the show, like I wrestled with this kind of demonic entity once, then you could bring that into a place, and it's highly irresponsible to be practicing that kind of thing. Because most likely there's some skeptical producer on the TV. They're like, whatever, just do whatever it takes to get people to watch the show. If you want to summon a demon, summon a demon. All I care about is the bottom line.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's why they went in the demon direction. It's like, how can we make this more and more scary? How can we get more people watching? How can we keep people on the edge of their seats? Ghost is one thing, but you go in a demon direction, that's a whole different ball game. And they all absolutely shit themselves. I mean, let's be frank about it. They all shit themselves, but it does kind of look like they are in that situation, and stuff is happening around them, and there doesn't seem to be any evidence that I can see that they're putting it on. But I could be completely wrong. They could have Penn and Teller working for them, for all I know.
I would have thought though, summoning demons on TV, there's like we've spoken in the past about when you have a medium come on TV like Derek Acora or Colin Fry or Tony Stockwell, whoever the UK one is that they always have this disclaimer saying this medium is on TV for entertainment purposes only, and nothing should be construed from his performance, etc., etc.
But that's a legal clause. I have to do that. I
Yeah.
don't believe in it, and I don't agree with it, but I have to do it.
Beginning of my book says it's for entertainment purposes. One time I had a conspiracy theorist flip out. That means it's all a lie. Your book is a lie. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
But that's what they say on TV. But you know, there's regulations put down by broadcasters by the Ofcom, which is like the regulator here in the UK anyway. And I would have thought, I mean, I haven't looked into this side of demonology because I didn't really think anyone would be doing it on TV, about summoning demons live on TV. Like, you can't, for instance, someone getting hypnotized, for instance.
What they do, I think Fred summons the demon off camera, and then, but they have referred to the fact that he's done that. And sometimes what he does in Latin on camera is ask if there's any spirits around. So he's not actually asking for demons on camera, but he has done it off camera, if you see what I mean.
Here's a demon I summoned earlier.
Yeah, essentially he would have done a rite or an occult ritual summoning a demon before the show starts, or at least off air. But then when he's walking around with them, he'll be asking in Latin if there are any spirits around, but that's more spirit-based rather than demon.
What's the purpose of the demon?
Who has done that before work? You know, come on.
Say again, Cyrus?
So who hasn't summoned a demon before you go to work? I mean, hasn't everybody done that?
I'm sure people learning Latin accidentally summon demons all the time. It must be a real problem.
Getting back to David Thompson just slightly, I was talking about earlier about this engineer mechanic guy that had been to a seance of his, and I think there was a testimony that he had put on a website, maybe it's David Thompson's own website, saying that I declare this to be genuine from my point of engineer, because I know about how fraud is done, etc., etc. And he declared, from at least his point of view, that everything that he had seen at that David Thompson seance, whenever it was absolutely 100% genuine, and it could not be replicated through magic or trickery or fakery of some sort.
There was also a stage magician who made a similar testimony as well. Yeah.
Against him, you mean?
No, for him.
Oh, for him. Oh,
also at the Skulls experiment, they brought in magicians as well that were a bit flummoxed.
They did. Three of them. Three of them. Well, unless it was the same, I think it could have been the same magician 3 times. Is that right?
Okay, possibly.
Yeah. Who declared it again? He could not replicate what was going on in the Skull experiment. And there's been accusations from the skeptics saying, but they all did it in their own house where it was all controlled and things like that. But in fact, contrary to what they say, the Skull experiment went out on the road and they did similar things out in the United States. They also visited, I believe, on that afterlife experiment, which is featured on YouTube. Robin Foy and his wife and a few people from the Skull experiment visited this guy in Italy, who's probably passed away now, thinking about it. He was quite an elderly gent, who was an Italian guy who was bringing through spirits from Italian spirits of this local village, you know, kids that had died, relatives that had died, through his old wireless wartime radio.
That's right, yeah.
Have you seen that, Cyrus? Are you aware of that one? Yeah, that was quite impressive, wasn't it?
Like Marcello, hold on.
Is it Mazzini?
Marcello Bacci.
Bacci.
And he had like his old radio apparatus, and it was very similar to what, like I mentioned, Sonia Rinaldi earlier. So it's a very similar type of thing. So he had basically a little lab with his radio, and you know, deceased people would come through and talk to, like, have reunions like with their mothers. And Rinaldi does the same thing out of Brazil, but then, you know, she's upgraded it into like having like a videographic apparatus. So she recently completed an experiment with 30 people who had lost loved ones, and like all 30 had like their loved ones appearing basically on interdimensional Skype, you know, like waving at the camera, smiling, thumbs up, whatever, showing that they're still around, sometimes looking much younger than when they had passed.
So one of the interesting things about your afterlife experiences, Cyrus, is the greys. I want to hop back into the UFO direction. Have you had any experiences yourself of either seeing UFOs or being abducted? And was it around the time when you were looking into the afterlife?
No, it was actually when I was a child, and so we were in a UFO hotspot. So we had all kinds of UFOs growing up. It was literally a weekend pastime. So we'd all come, my brothers and their friends would come down. We'd watch the UFOs, and we had one guy who was like a total skeptic, and it was like the roommate of one of my brothers, and then he went on to become like a UFO researcher because he was so blown away by the experiences out in Southwest Arizona. And so we had like an incident of missing time, like, it was a half-hour drive back to the house from someplace with my mom and my brother, and it took us 3 hours, right? So that's a bit of an issue, isn't it? We don't know why. And then my one brother had a memory that we didn't have of seeing a light coming towards us, so that's not good. So clearly, and then I had like a phobia of the gray alien the rest of my life. Still, I get the chills if I Google like the gray alien, and I see that face staring back at me. It's like I have some memory that's been loosely covered up by blankets, and it's kind of sticking out of my mind a little bit. So I believe all that probably is legitimate. I used to say most abduction probably happens astrally, but I also think it can happen physically, because I think that was a situation where that did happen physically. But interestingly, since I've gone down that rabbit hole, and I always avoided that topic until probably the last couple of years. And since because I do consider myself a supernatural researcher, but it was always on the life after death spiritual spectrum. But since going down the rabbit hole of listening to like insider testimonies, these people who claim to have served like in secret space programs and things of that nature, I've learned a lot of interesting stuff. Namely, the concept that abduction like that, again, follows that kind of universal law of cosmic consent, and that oftentimes we agree before we're born that we're going to let these extraterrestrials take us because they need our genetics or whatnot, because, it's either saving their species or they're trying to create some hybrid that will also like aid in their spiritual evolution. Things like that. So also we're going to like, kind of past life stuff. People talk about that. So as kind of nasty as it sounds, it's also possible like even what happened to me could have been something that we all agreed to. It's like, hey, go ahead and take us and cover the memory up so it doesn't disturb us, and then do what you need to do, take our DNA and be done with it.
How many have you seen, would you say, or how many experiences have you had? Was it one big one, or was it lots of different ones, or?
With what, UFOs or gray?
Sorry, the greys in particular.
I've never really had, like I mentioned, my brother has.
Oh, your brother. Okay. With him, sorry.
With him, he was getting. And with him, it almost wasn't like it was a gray. He described it a bit like a human termite, like a short little termite-like creature that looks bug-like, and they would hang around his bedroom and basically torment him. And this happened for a long stretch of time, and I think it's left like a bit of a scar on him. And basically, he had also read the Monroe book, Journeys of the Body. He was practicing out-of-body experiences, and it led to those things happening to him. And so the big takeaway point about that for me is don't mess with out-of-body experiences unless you have a good spiritual equilibrium, a good spiritual footing. Because you want to be on a high vibration. If you are not on a high vibration, you may attract astral creatures, like species that exist on that side, who may begin harassing you and terrifying you. And my brother wasn't doing that. He wasn't the most spiritual guy. Like he was approaching it more like some kind of evil wizard who wants to learn about these things, to like learn about get power and learn about tricks and cosmic secrets and things like that. He wasn't doing it from a position of like higher consciousness and love and light and the things you have to do to the mindset you need to be in to explore that side. So if you're like my brother, you could have negative experiences. So don't do it unless you have an inner peace. You're kind of a nice guy or girl. You have a nice sense of yourself. You don't have any kind of negative or selfish intention. Then I think you'll be like me and have almost no negative experiences. Like there was that one demonic thing at one time, but I mean, I think that thing was being very bold. It didn't go very far. I've never had shadow people or termite people or anything like this happen to me. And, people listening, they don't have to have it happen to them either if they just have the right mentality.
In your book, you kind of come to the conclusion that there is, and you almost say it's like a contradiction, which I found quite interesting. Maybe you'd like to explain it. You said there's no such thing as the afterlife, and I found that quite funny. Could you enlighten us on why you came to that conclusion?
Because there isn't an afterlife. There really is. It's just life. So life just goes on and on. So what we're living in a multi-dimensional universe, and any species that would be even a bit more advanced than us wouldn't see things in the prism of like being born and then dying, the finish point, non-existence. Like all of that is basically superstition that the human species has developed. And any other species would simply see it as, switching between different planes and universes. So we talk about UFOs that maybe can just punch a button and then go between realms. That's kind of the way it's supposed to be. So there really isn't such a thing as an afterlife. There's just different dimensions, and there's just life that doesn't end. And so we have this illusion of like the body dying, and we have all these rituals about it, and we have all these superstitions about it. But that's all it is. It's just a bunch of superstition. In reality, I mean, life just goes on, and we evolve at our own pace, and we switch between different universes, and that's the way it's always been. And that's the kind of the truth behind it, So in that sense, it's not like there's an afterlife. It's just life,
It's just the other side of the page, really, isn't it? Go on, Andy. We've got about 2 more minutes, I think.
2 minutes. Oh, 2 minutes to cram this one in. I was going to say, Cyrus, did you come close to anything that you would describe as God or the God consciousness? And what did they say?
I have not. There's certainly people in this field who do, like Jürgen Ziwe, Jurgen, multidimensional man, like people who are very good at like these entering higher levels of consciousness. They may encounter like their higher self or life in like exalted higher dimensions, which are way more like evolved or higher consciousness than like astral realms. And they may encounter this kind of all-encompassing knowledge or consciousness. And all that stuff is quite real. I think because my focus is more on like helping people who are grieving, reunions with deceased people, and having like an awesome life like on the astral side, I'm not so interested in that stuff. I think maybe in the future someday I will be, but I guess I'm not like the transcendent consciousness kind of guy. I'm a little bit more hands-on. But a lot of people in this field are really, really good at meditation, and they can enter level states of consciousness like that and have experiences, what we call God.
Right, I think we're going to have to wrap up, gents, but it's been a fascinating couple of hours with Cyrus. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. You mentioned you got another book out that came out in July, Cyrus. What was that one again?
Okay, yeah, so we have Understanding Life After Death. I finished The Afterlife and Beyond. So that came out in July. You can find them on Amazon. If you're lucky, you might be able to find them like at a Barnes & Noble, but safest bet is to find them online. You can go to afterlifetopics.com. We have a Facebook group called Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. We have almost 8,000 people in the group. We have those big discussions. There's a little fledgling YouTube channel called Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics where I do a lot of little lectures. I even have classes I do a couple times a week. All that info is on the Afterlife Topics website. And yeah, I hope you, if you're interested, Afterlife and Beyond is a sequel to Understanding Life After Death, but it's also a good standalone book as well, as I go into greater topics about even some of the stuff we touched on tonight, like extraterrestrials and more expanded subjects than the first book.
Excellent. Oh, I'm definitely going to have to get that one then. Put that on my Christmas list. And talking of Christmas, this is our Christmas show. So we'd just like to say thank you once again to Cyrus Kirkpatrick for joining us from Los Angeles, and just like to wish everybody a happy holiday, happy Christmas, whichever you prefer, from Andy and myself. And thank you once again for joining us on the Paranormal Peep Show. And you can listen to all our shows on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, YouTube. I've got my own YouTube channel, Neil Peel, NEILPEEL, where you can catch up on uploaded versions of our show to that. And if there's any topics you'd like us to cover, any interviews you want to try us to cover as well, please get in touch via our Facebook page, which is the Paranormal Peep Show on Facebook. So
yeah,
it's Go on,
And
Andy.
yeah, I just want to say if people want to have a look at Tuned In events as well, also on Facebook, covering kind of like psychic demos and events. We've got a few things coming up over the Christmas period in the Hertfordshire area. And remember to behave yourselves, because otherwise the Christmas Krampus will come and get you.
Oh, most definitely, most definitely. All right, well, thank you very much from all of us here, and thank you once again, Cyrus, and have a happy 2019, I suppose it'll be coming up.
It will,
next year. All right. Cheers and good night from all of us.
Happy Christmas.
Merry Christmas.